If we look at the stuff I have introduced so far, it's all been pretty high on everybody's wishlist. But I also want to be a bit more ambitious than that. So I have an idea, hear me out.
The more stuff I add, the more I worry that the percentage of the total player base that will actually see it gets smaller and smaller. Of course, it's good to keep that core of true fans in mind, but if I can get new players to also enjoy the more recent additions, I catch two birds with one stone.
The most effective way to introduce some simulation mechanic to new players is highlighting it with scenarios. So let's do that. This will be a scenario where you have to create a blood-drinking animal, and this is another where you have to create a species with more than 2 sexes. And this one where you have to create an animal that can fly, or this one where you have to create a plant that sheds its leaves during the cold season. And it doesn't stop there, there will be much more. What if I tell you these are 4 separate scenarios, but at the same time they are all the same thing? For those of you new here, this is Evolution simulation game The Sapling, my solo indie game project. It has 2 game modes. There are scenarios tasking you to design an ecosystem that meets specific requirements, but there's also a sandbox where you can build your own algae, plants and animals, turn on random mutations and see how they evolve. And more scenarios are just one of 3 things I want.
The second is permadeath, where you are given a certain task on a certain planet, but like in real life, you get only one chance. If you die, you will never see this world again.
We know permadeath from genres like roguelikes and platformers, but I think it could be a perfect match and huge missed opportunity for simulation games. Because it raises the stakes, it adds so much more emotion, so let's pioneer that idea a bit in this update. Finally, something that is often noted is that the sandbox where you get access to all body parts at once is too overwhelming. Part of the fun in a game that has a lot of content is unlocking all of that content one by one. So what do you get when you combine an endless supply of scenarios with permadeath and unlocking body parts? A new 3rd game mode, the Daily Challenge. So for those of you wondering, that's why I suddenly added a separate screen with just 2 buttons. I was planning for a 3rd one. Obviously, a daily challenge really depends on a good generator. Or 3 generators to be precise. Let me quickly go over them. Firstly, the terrain generator. This one I already added to the planet editor quickly after the CN Sandbox update, because so many players suggested a randomize all button. All I had to do now was to cut it loose from the planet editor and make it available to other components in the codebase. Unlike the name suggests, the generated planet is actually not random at all, because the more extreme things you have on a planet, the harder it is to create a life form that will survive. So instead, the generator picks one thing that can be more extreme, like the wind strength or the softness of the soil, and keeps the rest within more moderate ranges. The second generator is not about place, but about time. It adds a colder season, for example, or a meteorite, or rising sea levels. It only fires about half of the time, but gives each scenario a special touch. The 3rd generator takes all of this into account and chooses a challenge from a pool of templates. Not all templates make sense for all planets, however. For example, if the number of places where a plant can grow is really small, the challenge generator should not suggest a plant-related challenge. To determine which templates won't work, I am again reusing some code from the planet editor, the code that calculates a planet's habitability. All templates that do not apply according to the habitability statistics are taken out of the pool before the final choice is made. The 3 generators use a seed which I set to be the current date, meaning everyone gets the exact same daily challenge. I'm kinda hoping this game mode will be some sort of community activity, where everyone can try the challenge, perhaps even try to speedrun it, and then discuss the results afterwards.
For this to work best, it's of course important that everybody gets access to the new challenge at the exact same time. Preferably a time where as much people as possible are awake or almost awake.
I've selected this time to be 8 PM UTC, with an in-game counter showing how much time you still have until the next challenge unlocks. Speaking of speedrunning, little fun fact, when the very first version of this game launched on Steam, I invited a Spore speedrunner to play the game and they agreed. You can still watch that speedrun here on YouTube.
Of course, I try to play quite a few of these generated scenarios myself, and one thing I noticed is that I often wanted to reuse an animal that I created for a previous scenario. In other words, while fun at the beginning, after a while it gets quite annoying that the game forces you to start from scratch all the time.
For that reason, I've now also added the option to archive your creations and reload them again on another planet. This makes the daily challenge feel like a deck builder card game, and I found myself strategically designing a creature that I could quickly evolve into whatever the daily challenge requires today. The species are saved as a file on your computer, so you can also share them with other players. This by itself has all kinds of interesting consequences. For example, players can now organize Bibbit-style tournaments to see who generated the most versatile creature.
For me personally, I also plan to do a more interactive version of Evolution Simulated, where followers on social media get to provide the starter organisms and have a say in natural disasters and stuff. More about that later.
If all goes according to plan, a large part of the player base will spend a significant part of their playtime in this new daily challenge mode, so I thought it would be appropriate to award these players with some extra music. Longtime viewers might know that the music is created on the fly by randomly mixing musical fragments that all fit together, because the music always stays in the same key. These fragments are organized into 5 layers. The background layer, which are solo strings, the epic layer, which are extra strings and bass faded in when the player zooms out, the color layer, which are French horns and clarinets, the rhythm layer, which fades in when the player speeds up time, and the foreground layer. The foreground layer has a number of generic fragments, but also a few that only trigger when the camera is close to specific weather types. The one you're hearing right now is the theme for rain, for example. For some more variation, I've changed the music engine so it can have separate color fragments depending on the game mode, and created new daily challenge fragments using this virtual Native American flute, which I really like. I then did the same for the foreground. The new foreground fragments use the celeste and the piano. Like all the new music, I'll also add this stuff to the soundtrack on Steam. So as for new features, that is all that I have for you at this time. I hope you've enjoyed this devlog season, and don't forget that the first public builds will appear on the beta branch on October 31. Players who've tried a beta branch before know that I am a man of my word when it comes to releasing stuff on beta branches. I will upload whatever I have at that point, no matter how buggy, so please be prepared.
Also a heads up, I will use October 31 as an opportunity to increase the price of the game a little bit, so if you already know you want to buy, you might want to do it before that date.
Wait, you didn't expect me to do a whole season of devlogs and barely mention performance, did you? Because we all know this is a major problem the game still has. If half of the players cannot use all of these new features, I might as well not have added them. Therefore, this update will not only contain a crazy game mode idea, but also an optimization project that, when I started, sounded ambitious. Let's take this scene. This is what the performance looks like, which you can think of as the before picture in a makeover TV show. I'm slightly oversimplifying, but you can think of the green part as the time your GPU takes to translate the 3D models into 2D frames to display on your monitor. You can make this time shorter by lowering the settings or with stronger hardware. As you can see though, on my high-end PC, this part is not the main problem. It's these blue spikes, caused by creating and keeping track of thousands of 3D models. The goal for now is to get rid of as many spikes as possible. My crazy optimization idea was that instead of hiding organisms in the distance, which is mostly what the game did so far, you can also go a step further and not even build them at all. This means that the game has to build them on the fly really quickly whenever the player actually does zoom in to look at a particular organism. So far, I've always thought that building so many objects on the fly would cause an unacceptable lag spike stutter. But when working on this update, I suddenly had the insight that in the current system I am already building and removing hundreds if not thousands of organisms in the background every frame. This process is highly optimized, which is why the game runs at all. So instead of doing lots of work in the background to be ready in case the player zooms in, let's only do a little bit of work when the player actually does zoom in. This way there is no need anymore to keep track of thousands of objects. Unfortunately, this idea meant redoing quite a lot of visualization code, so I started with the simplest organisms, algae, and immediately saw a huge increase in FPS and decrease in memory usage for underwater ecosystems. So I've now moved plants to this new approach as well. Unlike algae, which can be completely invisible because of the water, there has to be a billboard here that is roughly the same size as the plant it represents. This means we're still managing thousands of billboards, so the question now is, to what extent is that an improvement over thousands of detailed plant models? Because the success of this feature is so crucial to the future success of the game, I actually filmed myself working on it. Now the game only has to worry about plant models close to the camera instead of the whole map, most of the blue spikes have been eliminated, making it possible to watch a large map full of plants with random mutations turned on and high time speed at acceptable frame rates. Please don't think that this will magically solve all the performance problems that this game has. It's still possible, also on my high-end PC, to get an FPS in the single digits, or to run out of memory. This update is, however, the largest step forward for performance in years. This means that way more people will be able to enjoy larger planets, teeming with simulated life, with acceptable frame rates. It's at moments like these that I'm reminded of that long train ride home, writing the very first code for this project, and wondering how close I'd get to simulating tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of organisms, all living and evolving on the same planet in real time. That dream is now closer to reality than ever. Thank you so much for sharing it with me. Okay then, for the final bonus parts, I have one which is inspired by the crazy pterosaur crests, increasing an animal's attractiveness. Initially I was wondering what to do with the sides, until I saw what the model for the top looked like on the sides. Yeah, I'm totally keeping this. And my favorite new body part for last, a sail with bioluminescent parts. To give the player some extra creative freedom, I've made it so the lights take on the secondary color of the animal.